G'day, Steve Morgan here, Fishing Monthly magazines, and we've come on another field trip today out to the Platypus headquarters in North Brisbane, and we're doing the second of our in-depth line tests. This time it's about fluorocarbon leaders, and we've picked the 20-pound line class to test, and we're going to do quite an in-depth test. There's several things we can test with lines. We can tell you what's on the market, we can tell you how much you get on a spool, we can tell you how much it costs. We can measure quite accurately with these verniers the diameters of these lines compared to the stated diameters, and of course we've got their line testing machines here so we can test both strength and abrasion resistance. Now, the reason why we use a fluorocarbon leader on the end of a rod and reel is because, well, we've seen with the braid tests, braid, it's very visible in the water, but also it's not that abrasion resistant. We couldn't bring the absolute results of the braid test to you a while ago because the labelling and the categorisation is so all over the place, but this fluorocarbon, it seems like it's all pretty standard, and we can bring to you what is the thinnest, the most abrasion resistant, the most cost effective and the best value for money fluorocarbons. So the tests are going to get started. Let's get stuck into it. So the first of the tests we've lined up is the diameter test, and this is actually the easiest to do. We've got a really accurate set of verniers, and we've got the line, and I'm going to measure it in 3 places, and we're going to take an average of those 3 measurements. So this is the scientific way we do it. Hold it up under not too much tension, but the same tension for each of them. First one, this gives me 0.39, 0.38, 0.38. And what does it say? 0.37. So it's pretty close. So this is Platypus's really cool line testing machine, and it does the job really well. You take the spool of line, we add the line to it, and it does it in a way where it doesn't actually pinch the line. And then as this rolls around, it measures the pressure being pulled up on here with this graph. So I'm going to go around here 3 times. I'm going to add it in. And I'm going to go up the top, and I'm going to go around here 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Pinch that in. And as I turn this on, you'll see the tension here increase, and it'll tell us at exactly what point that line breaks. This here's some Schneider, and this is the first of our 3 readings that we do to get an average. So there you go, 22.8 pounds. That's the first of our 3 readings. So one of the reasons that we use fluorocarbon is because it offers some sort of shock absorbing in the system, and although braid only stretches a couple of percent, fluorocarbon is supposed to stretch around that 10-11% mark, and then normal monofilament nylon line stretches at around 20 to 25%. So we can see in the example here, we're going to rig this Shimano line up here, and I'll just show you how much it stretches during this test. The braids were locking up and breaking quite quickly when we did the braid test, but just watch how many times this goes around down here. Keep an eye on how many times it goes around before this breaks. Remember, it's only stretching about 6 inches of line. See how many rotations it does before it hits that around 20-pound breaking strain. Bang, and there you go, 19.7 pounds, but it went around it 2 or 3 times and really stretches. So as for stretch, definitely stretches more than braid. So this is the test that everyone's always really interested in, and because we've got good base diameter and breaking strength data, this time the abrasion test data is going to be actually quite relevant, and we can standardise it between the lines. Now we have Platypus's 20 million RPM machine here. It must have done that many revs over the years. We get a sample of our line, and we just put a little granny knot in each end, so we've got a loop in each end. It hooks one end over this loop. It goes over the sandpaper, which is fresh every time we do it. It has a weight that goes down on there on one end, and these are the counters. So it needs a little bit of weight for that to click in to count. So we have this weight here as well. there are little counters here that tell me how many RPMs it go, how many revolutions of the sandpaper it does until it breaks. And we've found it's actually been quite accurate. And of course we do 3 repeats for each line to get an average value for that line. Let's watch it go. You can see the counter ticking over here. And then one thing we noticed is the braid, well, we've got 240 grit sandpaper rather than 800 here, and it goes a lot more revolutions until it breaks. So it just shows that braid is not very abrasion resistant compared to fluorocarbon. And I also see, and it's broken there, we see that the fluorocarbon doesn't really clog the paper as much as the braid did. There's a lot of waxes and there's a lot of substances on the outside of braid, the coatings, which clog the paper. The fluorocarbon, when it runs over the sandpaper, tends to powder off, and we get this sort of white powder at the bottom after it's finished. So 3 repeats gives us our abrasion resistance reading. So there you go, there's the different sorts of line testing we do with Platypus's machines. Now it's back to the office to do the numbers. So we're back at Tackle Junkie headquarters now, and we have run the numbers, and we had some pretty interesting results come out of this test. The first and the most easiest to analyse is of course the price, and we got all of our spools. We checked with the suggested retail price of the manufacturers, and we divided the length of the spool by the price, and that gave us a price per metre. Now, there was a variance of 4 times between the cheapest and the dearest leader. The most affordable leader was 20 cents per metre. It was the Suffix Super 21 FC, but close behind it at 25 cents a metre was the Platypus Stealth FC. So if you're just after the cheapest fluorocarbon leaders you can find in Australia, in £20 class, these are the 2. And it varied up until 4 times that amount. The dearest in the whole class was the Sunline FC 100. 80 cents per metre, that one there. That's a 30 metre spool. And the second most expensive was the Asari Fluorocarbon, this one coming in at 67 cents per metre. Now, I'm sure that not a lot of you actually really care about the price of the leader. If it's a good leader, you'll pay the money to do it, especially considering that you might only use 2 or 3 metres of leader per time. A litre of this may only cost you $2 or $3. And a litre of this one only maybe 60 or 80 cents. I suppose it comes down to performance, but when we're rating things later on, that's going to become important, so we'll come back to it. So the next set of results was the line diameter testing, and if you remember, we did it on the verniers, and it was a pretty easy test to do, and surprisingly most were fairly close to their stated diameter, and we do it in millimetres because that's how most of the world works. The leaders ranged from 0.3 of a millimetre diameter up into 0.48 millimetres in diameter, so it's actually quite a big variance as well. 0.18 of a millimetre is actually over 50% thicker. So later on in the test we do a little bit of maths to help standardise this, but let's have a look at the leaders which came in the thinnest. The thinnest was also the cheapest. That Suffix 21 FC came in at 0.3 millimetres, and it states 0.35 millimetres, so it actually tested a lot thinner than it states. And then the Shimano Oshia leader came in at 0.34 millimetres, so they're the 2 thinnest ones. So if you're just after a thin 20-pound leader, maybe they're the ones to buy. The thickest was Berkeley Vanish. This came in at 0.48 of a millimetre, and you can nearly tell that when you play with it. It is a thick leader. More about this leader later on, but the second thickest was 0.46 of a millimetre, that Wilson FC shock leader. Now, all of this raw data, I've put it on the screen here, but it's going to be available in a future issue of Fishing Monthly magazine, and if you're in the trade in Australia, it's also published in the After Trade Annual for 2021. So there's the thinnest and there's the thickest leaders. It's going to be interesting when we start crossing thickness with abrasion resistance, strength with abrasion resistance, etc. So let's get on to that. Now, this is where it starts getting a little bit more interesting when we ran all of the leaders through Platypus's strength testing machine. And remember, this is 20-pound line class fluorocarbon litres. They broke between 16.7 pounds and 29.1 pounds. So the heaviest were nearly twice as strong as the thinnest, as the weakest. And of course, it's going to be proportional to thickness in a lot of the case. So there's no surprise in the FC rock was the least strong, 16.7 pound that broke at, and the Suffix, which was the thinnest and the cheapest, broke at 18.4 pounds. So they're the weakest leaders in the 20-pound class. The strongest ones, of course, the Berkeley Vanish. It broke at 29.1 pound, but remember, it was over 50% thicker than the thinnest line. And the Wilson's FC Fluorocarbon, that broke at 26.7 pounds. So unlike braid, where braid was breaking at 2.5 times its stated strength, the leaders were actually pretty close. 20-pound leaders only varied by 9.1 pound over and 3.3 pounds under. Compared to braid, that's actually really close, but there is still a fair variance in results. When we start crossing diameter with strength and combinations, that is where it gets interesting. So let's firstly have a look at all of the abrasion results. So as you can imagine, it was a fair old afternoon at Platypus, putting all of these leaders through the abrasion test, not once, but 3 times each. And all of the results we have here are a result of an average of 3 results. And what we learned with both the abrasion and the strength and the diameter testing is that the fluorocarbon leader is pretty uniform. There was very little difference in the strength tests, usually only maybe a pound either way. And even the abrasion resistance tests, if it was more than 5% difference between the top and bottom test, it was actually quite unusual. I would expect it to actually be more variance than that, but that's how it panned out. Let's get to the abrasion testing results. The ones that let go the quickest were the Sunline V Hard, 52 turns on the machine to drop. Now, compare that to some of the braids, which took less than 10 turns on a sandpaper, which was 3 or 4 times thinner than the gritty stuff that we tested this on. Even the least abrasion resistant 20-pound fluorocarbon absolutely eats braid for breakfast. The second least abrasion resistant one was, of course, the Suffix Super 21 FC, 56 turns. But in that 50 to 70 turn bracket, there are quite a lot of lines. Again, you can see the full results here. It's when you start combining diameter with abrasion and abrasion with strength that some of the real interesting results come out. At the top end of the scale, the most abrasive resistant one was the Wilson FC Shock Leader. 112 turns it averaged for this to let go on that 240 grit sandpaper. And then the Schneider Crystal Clear, 96 turns. So they were the 2 standouts when it came to absolute abrasion resistance. So it's when we start crossing these results and comparing, making it maybe apples for apples, that we start seeing some real results come out of this test. Now, the first comparison we'll do is strength versus diameter. You can assume that the thicker the line is, the stronger it is, but the way we've done it, and you can see the graph on the screen here now, anything which is for its diameter much stronger is going to fall on the bottom side of that line of best fit. And so we've pulled all of those lines out to say, if you want, excluding any abrasion resistance, if you want a thin, strong leader, these are the leaders that you should be looking at. And in no particular order, thin and strong is the Suffix 21, it's the Shimano Osea, it's the Schneider Crystal Clear. Even though it tested low, the Sunline V Hard is a very strong, thin leader. The Suffix 100%, the Black Magic Fluorocarbon and the Asari Fluorocarbon all sat underneath that line. So they were in the better half of the results for strength versus diameter. Remember, this is the leader you want if abrasion isn't a problem. If you're casting for fish on a flats that have no teeth, that aren't going to rub you off on anything, and all you want is a real low visibility leader, these are the leaders to look at. So here's the next set of results. This is when we plot strength versus abrasion resistance, and you can see the graph here now. Anything which for its strength is particularly abrasion resistance will show up above that line of best fit. And again, in no particular order, and these are the leaders that I'd be looking at if you were fishing rough country, you're fishing barras, or you're fishing threadies, things which have rough mouths. This is the leader I'd be using because it is particularly abrasion resistance for the strength of the line. And I would be looking, in this case, at the Wilson FC shock leader. The Schneider comes out really well in that test. The Asari is a little bit closer to the line, but it still comes out above the line. The Suffix FC100, Shimano's Osea leader, the Sunline FC Rock is a good leader for that. Platypus's Stealth FC is only just above the line, but it is above the line. And the Sunline FC100, they are the 8 of the test samples which have above average abrasion resistance for their strength. Now here's another really interesting set of results. It's the diameter versus the abrasion resistant line. So have a look at this graph here. Anything which is particularly abrasion resistance for its diameter shows up below the line. So these 6 lines below the line are the ones that are going to be really interesting to you, and they're the ones that are particularly thin for their abrasion resistant characteristics. And of course we get the Suffix 21 fluorocarbon. We get the Suffix 100% fluorocarbon sits in that category, and there's only 6 that have fallen below the line here. The Siglon FC shows up in this category for being a thin abrasion resistant line. Shimano's Osea shows up again. Asari's fluorocarbon, that shows up in this category. And here we go, we're seeing again the Schneider crystal fluorocarbon popping up in the thin but abrasive resistant lines. So here's the last one, and this is a little bit more mathematical because we wanted to tease out that correlation between abrasion resistance and diameter. Of course, the thicker and more material there is in a line, the more difficult it's going to be to abrade through it. So to factor in that, we actually have worked out the cross-sectional area of the line. So as the diameter goes up, the amount of area of that line goes up, and it goes up in a logarithmic fashion. So a line which might only be 50% thicker might have 2.5 times the surface area, the cross-sectional surface area to abrade through. So we've done a plot, you can see it up there now. It's the abrasion resistance versus the surface area of the line, and these are the lines that came out on top there. It was the Wilson's fluorocarbon. Even though it was the most abrasion resistant, it's still above the line when it comes to the diameter. Abrasion resistance per diameter. The Sunline FC100 comes up there. The Schneider comes up again, as does the Asari fluorocarbon. The Suffix 100% pops up in there, and even the Super 21. It wasn't the most abrasion resistant line, but compared to its the actual amount of material in, it was very abrasion resistant. And of course we have the Shimano Osea leader in there. So that was, they're slightly different results from the overall abrasion resistant results. These are the lines that for their amount of line in them are particularly abrasion resistant. So have a look at those on the shopping list if that's what you're after. When it came down to it, we had to work out a way of how do we crown some of the champions in here. So I thought a good way to do it would be which lines turned up on the right side of that line of best fit in every one of our tests. And there were only 4 lines that did that, and they were the Asari. It showed up on the right side. There were also the Schneider. There was the Suffix 100%, and then there was the Osea. So we've whittled all of those lines there down now to the top 4. Now, any of these 4 lines, Asari, Schneider, Suffix 100%, and Osea, are going to be a good leader material, but what's the best way to split them? And we thought, well, let's go back to the price. And that's when it makes it interesting, because I think the winner at 39 cents per metre will be the Schneider. For the characteristics it has, it's the cheapest per metre leader which is out there. At the other end of the scale, there's the Asari. It's 67 cents a metre, but it has all of the right characteristics. And of course, the Suffix and Shimano sit in the middle. So if you're out looking at leaders now, you can go to Fishing Monthly magazines when the article comes out. It's going to come out after the middle of this year. You can have a look at all of the numbers, or you can pause this video and, you know, and write all the numbers down from there. But you can have all of the raw data and do your own calculations, because for us, they're the 4 best leaders on the market, and there you go. There's the winner when it comes to price. So got any interesting comments? Whack them down there below. Especially keen to hear from mathematicians and statisticians to tell us where we went wrong. But as far as I've seen, this has been a pretty comprehensive test of all of Australia's 20-pound fluorocarbon leaders that we could get participating that are in the market today. So Steve Morgan, Fishing Monthly magazines, taking off the lab coat, checking out.